Hello, welcome to the channel. Today I'm doing a walkthrough of my most recent image. It's going to be more of a brief overview than a step-by-step, but it should still be useful if you're curious about how I create my images. I've also included some downloads of process files so that you can use to make your own scenes. I want to make these videos as useful as possible, so I've included the mini kitbash Blender file and the Photoshop file for you to check out. It's pay what you want, so you can get them for free if you want. That's totally fine. But keep in mind, this stuff takes a lot of time and effort to put together, so if you got value out of it, please at the very least like the video, subscribe to my channel, and if you have any comments or suggestions, go ahead and put them down below in the comment section. So here we are in the model kit, and I just put together a few pieces for you to use in your own scenes. And the way I went about creating this was just using basic primitives for the block out. And then once the basic pieces were put together, I jumped over into sculpt mode to add details with brushes and brush alphas, which I have a video of if you want to see how to use brush alphas. Once the sculpting was done, I jumped back into object mode to decimate them so that they weren't so high resolution, because these are meant to be duplicated and moved around the scene. So once you have enough of them, it starts to bog down your computer quite a bit. You may still want to decimate them a little bit, depends on how close they are to the camera. So once that was all done, I added texture to it. It's pretty basic also. I tend to favor simplicity as long as it gets the job done. I don't like huge complex material trees. It's unnecessary for a lot of the work that I do because I'm just going to paint over it anyway. So I add a metal image texture to the base color. And then I also added a green kind of mossy texture, which is just color masked out with the normal direction. And then I also added ambient occlusion, so you can get this kind of nice rusty sort of discoloration in the deeper setback parts of the models. It's pretty simple, but I think it gets us a lot of the way there, and it reduces the amount of work you're going to have to do later with textures in Photoshop. So what I did was each piece in that set I marked as an asset and packed the textures in with the file. So you should be able to just drop it somewhere on your computer and then add the path into the preferences in Blender, and then it'll be available in your asset browser for you to just drag and drop pieces into the scene. And that's what I did to create the scene for the painting that you saw at the beginning. I knew I wanted some kind of temple entrance and a character entering that temple, and I wanted the overall vibe to be kind of like an ancient civilization that this adventurer is exploring. And so I kind of laid it out with that in mind, with the entrance being this kind of ornate gate. And in the back I placed these larger pieces to indicate that there's a larger building and maybe a sprawling complex that you could possibly get lost in. For the ground, it's just a ANT landscape plane generated with the built-in Blender add-on and textured with just a basic image. One neat trick I just learned is to change the render pass to shadow. And what this allows you to do is kind of generate a black and white image, kind of like what you would do with a thumbnail drawing if you were concepting a compositional sketch in a sketchbook or your Photoshop or Procreate or whatever. So to do that, just put the viewport in the render mode and then change the pass in the settings to shadow. And then what I did was add these basic planes that are acting as light flags, just blocking the light where I don't want it to show up. It gives me an interesting kind of composition. Again, just sort of shaping the light and the values to highlight the gate there, which is what I want to be the focal point of the image. For rendering, I enabled the mist pass and adjusted the settings so that it had the right amount of depth to it. I use this mostly for selections so that I can kind of adjust the color and the atmospheric perspective of the objects that are farther back in the camera. For one thing, it adds realism to the image, and for another, it allows you to control the depth of the image in terms of composition. So the objects that are closer to the camera stand out more because they're darker and clearer, and the objects that are farther away kind of fade into the distance. I also enabled the normal pass, and this allows me to select faces that are facing a certain direction in case I want to add shadow or light to certain faces of the architecture. So once we're in Photoshop, usually the first thing I do is replace that neutral background with some kind of sky. This could be anything. I use the sky replacement feature in Photoshop, but you could hand paint it. You could add some kind of texture back there, like a mountain, to make it look like the temple sort of built into something. But for this, I just wanted like a dynamic sky. So I chose this cloudy, stormy looking sky, and then I flipped the image because it matches the lighting better. Once the sky's in place, I go over the whole image with the mixer brush and the regular paintbrush. And what I'm doing is knocking back that computer-generated, gritty-looking texture. This is supposed to be a large scene, and what happens is the texture kind of shows up too much in places where it would actually be a little blurrier because it's farther away from the camera, so it wouldn't be as easy to make out those details. So I'm going over the image and kind of roughing up the edges and putting in my own textures and just kind of generally making it look like it's more of an illustration and less like a computer render. And the key to this is really intentional brush strokes. I'm not going crazy putting brush strokes all over this image wherever I feel like. I'm trying to intentionally place brush strokes in spots where I need to knock back some of that detail and make it look more painterly and less computer generated looking. A good place to do this is edges that are too straight. It's good to just put notches in there, kind of rough them up, make them irregular. And doing this by hand enhances the painted feel of it. The next thing I do is add some kind of indication of a building inside of this doorway. I found it was too black and too empty. It just looks like an empty void leading to nowhere. So I added this indication of a floor and a ceiling leading back into a tomb. Originally I thought I was going to add wall sconces to the sides, but it didn't work. Then I went on to Envato Elements and I downloaded these 3D cutouts. They have this cool feature where you can spin a 3D model in any direction that you want and then download a pre-cut out PNG that you can use. And I find that pretty handy and it saves a lot of time. So once those are in, I added a levels adjustment and knocked back the highlights way far back so that the knights would be in shadow along with the ground plane that they're standing on. I also cut out and reposed the hand so it looks like he's slowly approaching the gate rather than storming the castle like a Monty Python skit. Then I hand painted in a cape just for effect because capes are cool. And all of this is done by hand because, again, it fits in with the whole hand-painted sort of illustration look that I'm going for. The last step was to add some fog overlays to the doorway there. Again, this is just to draw focus to that as the focal point. And these are also from Envato Elements. They're pre-made with just black and white so they can be easily placed in the scene, and then the black can be dropped out so it's just mist sort of billowing out of the entryway. And that was the last step as far as painting was concerned. There was a few extra things that I usually do to every image that I didn't record, and that's just to add a high pass filter set to soft light, which just sharpens the image to take some of the softness out of the edges. Sometimes I'll also add a dust and scratches layer, which is similar to the fog. It's just a black and white image with little specks of dust to make it kind of look like a photo or a cinematic shot. Once all that's added in, I'll stamp the whole image to a new layer, and then I'll take that layer into Adobe Camera Raw for final color adjustments. Once the Camera Raw adjustments are done, then I'll duplicate the layer again, and I'll play around with the cropping of the image by just transforming and resizing it within the frame. Sometimes in making the image, I'll end up with a lot of extraneous stuff that can be cut out of the image and strengthen the focal point, which is the character in the doorway. So this is the final image with the color adjustments and the sharpening that I was talking about applied already. I wanted to keep the top of the central building in the picture, but I was able to cut out a lot of the edges of the image that was taking away from the focal point, which is the center of the image there. And that's it. I hope this was helpful. If there's anything you want me to cover more in depth, I know this was kind of high level overview of everything, let me know in the comments. The asset files are linked in the description. They're over on Gumroad and on ArtStation. You can get them for free, pay what you want. Again, please, if you got any value out of this, like the video, comment on the video, subscribe. I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.